back to Speaking with Confidence, a podcast that helps you build the soft skills that lead to real results. Communication, storytelling, public speaking, and showing up with confidence in every conversation that counts. I'm Tim Newman, a recovering college professor turned communication coach, and I'm thrilled to guide you on a journey to becoming a powerful communicator. Today's guest is Rosie Zilinskas. Rosie spent decades climbing the corporate ladder, assuming that results would lead to recognition. But when she finally told a senior executive she wanted a leadership role, his response stunned her. "You never said anything." That moment taught her what so many mid-career women eventually realize. Being excellent isn't enough if no one knows what you want. Now, as a certified high-performance coach, Colby consultant, and former Fortune 500 executive vice president, Rosie helps ambitious women stop wanting to be chosen and start building careers that they love. Rosie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tim, for having me. I'm ready to talk all careers for women. So let's go.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you about how you help these young professionals and especially females prepare and grow in their professional careers. Too many people go through the careers hoping somebody notices how great they are, just like you said, but that very rarely happens. And that happens for many reasons, but can you share your story about how you were overlooked and how you actually turned the table?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because first of all, I had gone through a really terrible divorce. And based on the divorce, once that whole situation was done, I was responsible for taking care of my kids financially. And my children
Mm-hmm.
at the time were 5 and 7. And the only way, Tim, that I knew I could take care of them was getting a promotion, making more money at work. So I kind of hunkered down. I put all of my blood, sweat, and tears into becoming what they were calling a high performer. And, but I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm doing all the things. I'm training, backing up my manager. I'm the go-to person for so many things. And then I saw 2 people that were younger than me get promoted. And I was like, what? Like, I'm sitting here and nobody talked to me. Nobody asked me like, hey, do you want to, be promoted? Nothing. And then so then I gathered my, my script of what I was going to say. And I went and I talked to the senior executive. And when I pitched and I said, hey, I want to really, step into leadership and I want to, make an impact in the organization. He was like, really? And it was just like so shocking. I was like, what do you mean? Oh, really? And that's when he said, you never said anything. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was just literally sitting there thinking that they were just going to notice my hard work. And when I say they, it's like the senior management team. And I learned a valuable lesson that day because had I not gone to meet with the senior executive and say, listen, I want to step into a management role, nothing would have happened to me. And,
Yeah,
who knows how much longer I would have stayed there. So
right.
that was the critical lesson for me that day, Tim.
Yeah, and it's sad that that so many people find themselves in that situation. Because we get into work and we go to work wanting to do well, wanting to progress in our careers, wanting to help people, wanting all those things, and we just assume that people are going to notice that and help us and mentor us along to further grow. And it's sad sometimes that if we don't say anything, we get stuck. But that's really the norm. It's not it's not the rule that people are willing to see. Wow, Rosie's doing a really good job. Let's see what we can do to help her, progress. Or, what Rosie's struggling over here. What can we do to help her, get better at this or get better at that? And we get so siloed. And I don't think as young professionals, we realize how the business community or business actually works. If you don't speak up for yourself, just like anything else, nobody else is going to fight that battle for you.
Absolutely. I agree. And, even when I was in the corporate world, we were in charge of onboarding new hire college graduates, like recent college graduates. And I remember like people getting annoyed when they were there, like when the college graduates were there for like a year or two and starting to ask for promotions. And it was like they need to, make their or have time on the job and stuff like that. And I was like, what is wrong with them like asking for a promotion or what I mean, that's what we're trying to teach them to do.
Exactly.
But
To your point is if they're not ready for that promotion, that's another teaching moment. Okay, so
uh
yes, we see that you're doing these things really well, but if you want to get this promotion, these are the things that you need to do, or you need to work in this area, you need to work in that area, what have you. Not just beat them down and say, who do you think you are asking for a promotion? That's not um, that's, that's not helping anybody.
exactly, exactly. And and I think now that I kind of look back on that time, it's the values, and this comes up for me regularly when I talk to people that are older than I am, like say 8 to
Yes.
10 years older,
Uh-huh.
and they're like, "These young kids, they don't want to work hard." And I'm like, "That's not true. They
Hmm.
want to work hard, but they want to work hard within their values and their boundaries. And just
Right.
because you think that someone should be working 50, 60 hours and answering the phone on the weekend, that's your core value. That's not
Right.
theirs. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But there's this dichotomy of like the older, you know, older generation, younger generations, and what how they should be living their lives at work.
Yeah, and I've seen that, and I've lived that, and I've had those same discussions, and I've always been the person that says, no matter where I've been in my career, young professional, now obviously, a much more older professional, and I'm in that demographic that you talk about, where people say that they don't want to work hard, and when I tell people, as I've transitioned out of higher ed, um, the younger generation is so much smarter and so much entrepreneurial than any other generation. What they lack is the communication skills. And if we could just guide them in those skills, you're going to see some really, really great work and some really, really, really great innovations. And again, like you said, it's not that they don't want to work. It's that they've realized and they've prioritized different things in
Yes,
their life. And
absolutely.
we've seen that throughout history, right? You go back to the Greatest Generation. It was uh, husband worked, wife didn't work, but he worked and worked and worked and worked, and so we've transitioned to we our life doesn't revolve around work anymore,
Mhm.
and it's for some people it's hard to let that go.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just like, what's it to you? Like I always think like, what's it to you if they don't want to work 60 or, 70 hours? That's their choice. It's their
Right?
life. And I think we just need to understand that, as human beings, we cannot impose our values on other people. And
Yeah.
that's kind of part of the communication because as you will
Mhm.
know, in the corporate world, there are still generations like,
Yes.
like baby boomers, Gen
Yeah.
Xers, and then there's like the millennials, and it's just sometimes there's this like butting heads, but it all boils down to communication and values.
Yeah. And I had that conversation with my kids on a regular basis. So my kids are older. I've got grandkids, and um, my youngest daughter said to me a few years ago, she said, "Dad, I don't want to work like you work." And because like, I mean, I spend a lot of time at work,
Hmm.
but when I also prioritize family. So when I'm not at work, I'm not at work. And so like, I just came back from a 10-day, I wouldn't say vacation, but a 10-day away from the office where I spent with the kids and the grandkids. And
Hmm.
I worked when they were sleeping. I worked when they were at work. And when they were home, guess what we did? There was no work. And so, maybe teaching them to learn how to prioritize, when it's going to work for them, and modeling some of that behavior could go a long way as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, I agree. And then along the lines of like communicating, one of the other things that I work with, like with women, is when you are trying to because we talk about advocate for yourself and advocate for yourself, but then we don't explain what does that actually mean,
Right.
and essentially what I share with my clients is, listen, you need to be able to explain to your boss, your manager, a
Mhm.
hiring manager, how you can help them solve their
Their problems.
problems
Right.
using your skills and your knowledge. And if you're not able to explain that in a clear, succinct manner, then there's going to be no connection and they're going to be like, well, she can't help me.
Right.
And that's the trick to how do you advocate for yourself? Well, you start by learning about yourself. Understanding who you
Yeah.
are, what you like, what you don't like, the core values that we were just talking
Mhm.
about. What are your skills? When I was going through my career journey, I purchased that book. I'm sure you're aware of the What Color is Your Parachute book that
Mhm.
they publish every year. And it's a career development book. And it has all these exercises. I did every single exercise in that book as I was trying to learn about myself and figure out how can I explain to somebody that I can bring value to the organization. And once you're able to understand that about yourself, that's when you can start self advocating
Yes.
for yourself and explaining again. And it's all about a lot of times when we're in interviews, it's always like, it's me, 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 me. What I can do, I can. But no, it's really active listening about solving their
Their problem.
problems
Right.
and bringing stories that, that are relevant to that, you know, well, I have a challenge in my team with, communication. Well, hey, I've done a lot of communication work. I can help you with that because I did it in this organization. So that's when you start connecting the dots for people and they start imagining you being there as part of their team.
Right. And that is so important. You bring up a couple really good points in there. First and foremost, knowing who you are, learning what you believe, what your values are. We don't do enough of that. We don't teach
Mhm.
young generations enough of that. Um, and I don't want to throw the school system under the bus, but I think in some ways our school system has failed our kids, and that's in one of the ways. Um, in not really teaching them how to be critical thinkers, not really teaching them how to learn who they are, and we just as when they come to us, we just expect that they've already figured it out, but it hasn't, and that's a life journey too, because our values probably aren't going to change, but what we like and what we don't like and what we want to do are going to change throughout our careers, and how we're going to be able to bring value to other people is going to change as well, and teaching them to figure those things out is critically important, so that they don't get to 20 years into a career and, well, I didn't realize I never asked for a promotion.
That's exactly right. And I was 40 when they happened, so you're absolutely right.
It's but Rosie, that's not uncommon. I mean, I've done
Right.
the same thing. I mean, I was kind of in your same position. I mean, for me, I've had a few professional careers, and the last two for me, transitioning out was very, very difficult because I couldn't figure out what my next step was going to be. I knew that this one was winding down and coming to an end, but I didn't know what was going to be next. It was very difficult,
Mhm,
even knowing the process that you need to go through to figure those things out.
mhm. Yes, exactly. And, it's also interesting because you really need a well-rounded purview of who you are, and you're
Yes,
not able to do that on your own. So
right.
one of the other things that I have my clients do is, set up a coffee with 5 or 7
Yeah,
people that you have previously worked with and just ask them a couple of questions. Hey, I'm trying to let them first of all let them know that you're trying to develop yourself and give them permission to be honest with you.
honest. Yes,
You have to give them permission and then ask them, what have I done well that you have observed, and what can I do better? Because that's where, I'm a keynote speaker as well, and one of the things that I say in my keynote is feedback is fuel.
right,
Don't consider it criticism. Feedback is fuel to fuel your blind spots on how can you improve yourself. And once you get that, then you can start implementing and developing those things that they told you so
right.
that you can learn about yourself. Because again, the way you see me, Tim, is very different than the way I see myself. So those are key
Absolutely.
things.
So Rosie, that's another good point. How do you teach people to not take feedback as criticism? And let me give you a really good example of that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm obviously a person who's a lifelong learner, always trying to get better, this, that, and the other thing. Um, if my wife tells me that I need to change something, it's instant aggravation. Stop. But and this literally happened about 3 weeks ago. Somebody else told me the exact same thing, almost the exact same words. And I was like, wow, that's a really good point. So how do you teach people to learn how to take feedback, not as criticism, but as feedback to help you improve?
Well, I have this little acronym, and I tell people, whenever someone's giving you feedback, you have to take a lap. Meaning, first is you really need to, well, even before you do that, when you know that you're starting or that you're going into a conversation, or even like if someone just kind of, tells you, hey, you know what, you left the door open or whatever, or, it happens at home, like you kind of have to brace yourself, because anytime that we're told that we're doing something wrong, it stings a little bit, right? Because it's
Right.
like our souls are fragile, and sometimes when someone tells you that you're doing something wrong, so I say take a lap, because, in sports, whenever an athlete is having a difficult time or they're angry or whatever, the coach always says, take a lap.
Take a lap,
So
right?
what does take a lap means? Just kind of take a minute and walk it off. But the L is for really listen to what the person is saying to you. The second is for activating your listening skills to kind of try to pick up what is it that you're actually being told, because what you hear and what you interpret in your mind and your brain could be two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And then clarifying questions, just asking them for clarifying questions if you're not clear on what feedback they're giving you. And then the P is for putting into practice what they actually give you as feedback. So taking a lap is what I teach my clients to do when they're getting that feedback, and just kind of changing it from, oh my gosh, I'm getting criticism, to I'm getting fuel to get better, because feedback is fuel.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the mindset changes that we try to do when you're getting that critical feedback.
Right. And that's so important to again, take a step back and truly absorb and think about what's actually being said. And again, that's not personal. It's done in an attempt to help you improve, help you get better. And it's coming from a person who has good intentions.
Okay.
Not That's the other piece that especially young people need to understand when they're getting that feedback. It's not coming from the point of trying to put you down, because they're actually trying to help you improve and get better. And it's trying to get them to understand that I think is a critical piece from our perspective, so that they can be open to that feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Um, One other thing that I think is really important is, once you start doing that work on yourself to be able to figure out how to self-advocate, is the next thing that I talk to my clients about is just crafting your script. Meaning, okay, now that you know about yourself and how you can
Mm-hmm.
help others, what are the words that you're going to be using? How are
Right.
you actually going to phrase that so that it comes across as you're excited and passionate and you're vested in the success of the company? And so crafting your script is really important when you are in that discovery period of, like, you want to go talk to your boss about a promotion or whatever. You need to take the time to really write down and practice what you're going to say so that it comes across as positive, and that you, again, it all goes to, you're trying to solve their problems.
And I love this, because you can't do this without research and preparation, and putting the time and effort into doing these types of things, and because it doesn't just happen, right? You have to actually sit down and put some thought into it, do some research, practice how you're saying it, practice the terminology, practice the way that your tone, your facial expressions, your body language, so that it comes off as natural and um, and likable, right? And to me, to me, preparation is probably one of the biggest battles that we face to get
Mhm.
people to, especially younger people, to improve upon, because again, it doesn't just happen.
Exactly. And so a few of my clients have come to me and they're like, Rosie, can you help me gain confidence so that I can go out and self-advocate for myself? I'm like, well, I can help you. I can teach you how to prepare yourself so that you can learn more about yourself. And it's a parallel process where the more you learn about yourself and you're able to share that with other people, the more confidence you gain because you now know what to say and how to present it and how you can help and you can highlight your skills and all
Right.
of those things. So it's so interesting that, in real estate, they always say location, location, location. In career advancement, I'm always like preparation,
Preparation.
preparation, preparation.
Hey, and I'm right there with you, because it's so important, and it's um, it doesn't really matter to me, what you're going into from a professional perspective. If you're going into a meeting and you're not even, you know, if you're not responsible for sharing anything, but you still need to prepare it so that you have an understanding of what's going to be talked about, so that if something comes up that you can share about to add that value, you to do that, because you're invited to that meeting for a reason. You're not invited
Oh,
because they needed somebody to sit in that chair, right? They want you there. They want that input there, and you can't give that input if you're not prepared. If you're presenting in the meeting, you have to prepare so that you're presenting the information that needs to be presented. It doesn't really matter from my perspective where you're at in that professional piece. You need to be prepared to communicate, share your voice, share your opinion, and it seems that, again, that's a big piece to that needs to be communicated. But from a female perspective, how is that? Why do we think that? Why do you think that females undervalue their communication skills so much more than males do?
well, I'm sure you've seen that cartoon where there's a male and a female, and they're looking in the mirror, and the guy is like bald and like a little short and pudgy, and their belly's out, and they look in the mirror and they see this like beautiful, muscular man, and they're just seeing themselves as this like Adonis, and then the woman is, pretty svelte, and then she sees like this old person in the mirror, and she just doesn't see herself in a positive way. So a lot of this has to do with how we are just brought up as human beings, where men are just inherently more confident and they just go for it. And I'm going to actually share with you a little story that will kind of exemplify this. My husband and I went to Montana last year to
Oh, wow.
Glacier National Park, and it was
Oh, that's awesome.
beautiful.
It is.
And we were driving, and we were driving away a distance, and he was really tired. I said, you know what? Let me take over for a couple hours. You can sleep while we drive, and we'll get there. So we did that. We traded. He slept, and then I drove. And as I started driving, he fell asleep right away. And as I started driving, I very quickly realized that it was very curvy and hilly. And I was literally hugging like mountains. And I was white knuckling it the entire way there. And it was only a couple of hours. I was going at the speed limit. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, and my daughter was in the car. So I'm like, I cannot, I cannot have an accident. So, okay. So then we got there, we were safe. I was like stressed out the whole time. And then we got there, we were like eating or whatever. And I asked my husband, I said, so are you ever worried when you drive on the roads, And he's like, no. I was like, but do you ever like think about it, or you're like, are you concerned about like the roads being all windy and curvy? And he's like, no. I'm like, so you have no, he's like, what are you talking about? And that is like after I thought about that story, that's kind of the way men and women are
Yeah.
in life and careers. Men don't even think about it, Tim, whereas sometimes we are literally white knuckling it and trying to figure out, oh my God, am I going too fast, too slow? I'm gonna, hurt my family. I need to be careful. And so women are inherently just more critical of themselves. And that's where the gap comes in, because if we were able to understand ourselves more and learn about our emotions and be able to show how we give value instead of how we take value away, that's when the transformation happens. And then you're able to shed some of that lack of confidence. And then they can
Yeah.
start speaking with confidence. Exactly.
Yeah. And again, I think to go along with that, the only way to gain confidence is to continue to do it. You can't just do it
Mm-hmm.
once.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to continue to do it. Continue to put yourself out there. Continue to um, share your thoughts and share your feelings on whatever it is. Even you bringing that up to your husband probably causes a tad bit of anxiety, right? What's he going? What's he going? What do you mean? What do you mean you're not confident driving the car? Now I've got to worry about you driving the car too,
Yeah.
or whatever it is, right? So that's part of putting yourself out there and learning how to share a thought, share a feeling, and be open to doing that. And I think that's especially from a business perspective, that's hard for young professionals to just get over. You just have to do it.
Yeah, back to that same story, it's like just the reflection of like, I was like, wow, he doesn't even think about it. He
Mm-hmm.
just drives. And here I am all stressed out about the same exact drive. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
how different, not just
Right.
men and women are, but people, everybody's different. But finding out, and I did some reflection work. I was like, okay, why was I stressed out? Well, it was a new place, very curvy, very
Right.
hilly. It was kind of starting to get a little dark. So it was a combination of factors. But to your point, the next time I'm still going to drive, and I'll get more and more comfortable as I do that more. But it takes time and it takes practice. And exactly in your career, it's going to take
Right.
time for you to show up for yourself in a
Right.
very confident way. And then you were talking about how you physically show up. Another way that I always talk to my clients is like that pesky handshake. It's like the handshake when you're in person and you shake someone's hand and you either give them like the half fingers or the, like your dead fish, like
Right.
handshake. That is actually conveys a lack of confidence, like that you don't want to shake someone's hand in a very comfortable and firm
Right.
manner.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're not confident enough to do that handshake, that says a lot about a person. So practice, just a simple practice your handshake, and that will give you more confidence just by
Yes.
appearing more confident to the other person, that is.
Absolutely. And like you said, what that does to you, from the inside out, how much more confident you feel, sticking your hand out, shaking that hand. And, for me, so this coming week, I'm going to an event that I hadn't been to before. It's a monthly event here where I live. And this is the first time I'm going to it. And as I was driving into work this morning, I told my wife, I said, we got to make sure we get the clothes back from the cleaners. She says, well, you're going to be hot. And I said, I don't really care because I've got to make sure this is the first time I'm meeting these people. I've got to come looking professional and
Mhm.
prepared. And, if we get there and after a couple of times, it's a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more, then I'll show up that way. But for me to feel confident, I need to make sure that I'm doing the things that I need to do for myself to go and show up to do the things that we need to get done. And she said, well, yeah,
Absolutely.
I guess you're right. I said, yeah. And if I'm hot, so what? If I'm hot, if I'm sweating, that is what it is. But if I don't show up professionally, if I don't show up who I'm supposed to be, then it doesn't really matter. Why are we even going?
Mhm. Exactly. Yep, I
So
agree. I mean, presentation is everything,
is
right?
right.
Especially,
Mhm.
and it's so interesting because I don't know, Tim, if you've heard that sometimes, and this isn't, I read a couple of articles, young people like college graduates are sometimes bringing their parents to job interviews.
Yes. That oh,
And
yes.
it's just like, wait, what?
Mhm.
Or sometimes I've heard, again, I've read articles that they'll have a video interview and they refuse to turn their camera on. I'm
Yeah.
like, what? Like, how is this possible? And it's that lack of confidence. And of course, like the whole parent coming to any parent coming to any uh interview, whether you're 16 or 20, whatever, that's just the parent over parenting. So,
Exactly. Right.
but you have to let the person do what they need to do. And if they fail, that's okay
Right.
because they can try again until they are comfortable enough to, get that job or whatever. But there's just so many things that young people are not allowed to do or able to do or encouraged to do.
Mhm.
But I mean, not turning on your video camera on an interview is not right. You need to be present and you need to show up, as you were saying, in a professional manner.
Right. That's not optional. That's requirement number one. You gotta
Right.
show up, and I mean, it has to be you. It can't be your parents. It can't be this, that, or the other thing. And it's funny that you say that because I talk a lot about, and I may be the complete opposite end of that spectrum. When my kids were in elementary school, what my oldest daughter came to me, was having a problem with a teacher, and I said, "Well, you need to go talk to your teacher about it." And she was looking for me to just solve the problem. I said, "No, you need to go talk to the teacher. And if at the end of that, you still think you aren't being treated fairly, and I'm not saying you didn't get the answer you wanted, I'm talking about you weren't treated fairly, then I'll step in."
Mm,
And that taught them at that point that that's goes back to the advocating for themselves and how you go about
mhm.
doing that. Um, and to this day, my oldest daughter she reminds me of that all the time. And I said, and look how that's helped you throughout your life and throughout your career. And look at some of your peers and
Mhm.
how they have trouble doing those types of things. And so you may not have liked it. My wife hated it because we're both educators, and
Right.
but in the long run, you showing up for yourself has done so much more for you than you could ever imagine.
Yeah, no, no, that's great. And I love that you were able to just say to her, no, you go solve your problem. I mean, that's really good. That's how it should be, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's to kind of go along with that and showing up in confidence. You've got four promotion barriers that women have. What are they, and how do they play into the preparation of advancing their careers?
Yeah, so there's four blockers that I talk to women about that they generally fall into one of these blockers. The first one is the worthiness blocker, where they may be discounting, defeating themselves, or disqualifying themselves, where they just don't
Mm,
feel like they're gonna, you know, be selected for the job, so they don't apply, or they just don't feel like they're worthy of that promotion. So it's the worthiness blocker. The second one is the popularity blocker, where you feel that you're just not part of the in crowd, the golden boy or girl crowd, and you're like, well, I'm never going to get the promotion because I'm not in that crowd. Three is the skills blocker, where you feel that you need to constantly be upskilling or getting certifications or getting degrees. I talked to a woman that she was like on her third master's degree, and I was like, what are you
why?
trying to prove? Yeah, like what are
Right.
you trying to prove? And then the last one is the visibility blocker, where they don't feel like they're ready to go out and do a presentation or be visible or ask or um, volunteer for a specific project, where they just don't want to be out there in the world. So those are the four ways that a woman can actually, hold herself back. And each one of these, we have different exercises, that we do, but the very first one, the worthiness blocker, that kind of goes back to what do you think about yourself and discerning if it's true or if it's not true. If you think, oh my man, I'm never going to get promoted. Well, why do you think that? And then you kind of have to start like, peeling back the onion of like, where in your life did you maybe have a
Right.
situation where you didn't feel that you were worthy and you carried that throughout your life and it's still showing up? A
Hmm.
lot of this is emotional situations that have happened and have triggered you so much that you still operate on that old belief. Um, the likability one is when you you see all these people getting promoted and you're like, oh my gosh, they just give promotions to all these other people. But there was this a study that I read about a law university, and the women were all complaining because the men were getting all the teaching assistant jobs in the law school. And then when they did some research, they figured out that all the men were asking for those teaching assistant jobs and the women were not asking for those jobs. So just because you see someone get promoted doesn't mean that they don't like you. It's that they asked, they took action.
Right.
And then the skills blocker is kind of obvious. You don't have to keep upskilling. You just have to, refine your skills and have a conversation. And then the last one, which is the visibility blocker, you have to make a concerted effort to speak with confidence,
Right.
go out there, make presentations, maybe, start some kind of thought leadership in your company. But these are all these four blockers are what generally someone falls into one of these four categories and they're like, oh yeah, that's the one that's holding me back. So yeah.
And that's identifying that is critical, because now you can start to work on that. And then my guess is you find somebody, okay, this is the one, you start addressing that. And then you see, okay, well, I'm also some of this. Now we
Hmm.
can address some of that a little bit too. And we can address this one over here. And that's going to really, propel them so much further. Once you identify whatever that is, apply some corrective action to it, whatever that is. Because again, it's different for everybody. And what holds us back, and the story that we tell ourselves for whatever that is different, but we still have to address it and figure out a way to move forward with that. Um, and I think it's great that you've identified those categories, because it makes it so much easier to identify it and move forward.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you just said, like once a woman knows that, you know what, I just realized that I am disqualifying myself because by not applying, I'm just assuming that I'm not going to get the job instead of like throwing my hat in the ring. Then I'm like, oh, I'm not going to get the job, so why bother? Well, then you're now moving from disqualifying yourself to in that defeatist mode where you're just like,
Right.
why bother? And
Right.
now you're not really engaged. So there's so many levels of knowing yourself. And then once you know, you can't unknow. And then if you don't
Yes.
take action, that's just because you don't want to take action,
Right.
because that's a whole new ball of wax right there.
Right. And you know what? That if you don't want to take action, again, that's fine, but own that. Own it.
Exactly.
Don't continue to say this, that, or the other thing. Own that you are choosing to not take action on it, fix it, address it, whatever that is. And that, what I found is when you uh, address somebody like that and they know what's happening, and then you say, okay, if you're not going to act on it, at least acknowledge that, and you're making that choice. And that a lot of times will trigger them and say, you know what, that doesn't make any sense. I'm
Hmm.
If I know that this is holding me back, or I know that this is causing me harm, or I know that this is causing me problems, or whatever that is, and I'm not going to do anything about it, it doesn't logically make any sense. And then that's something that does help propel them forward into fixing it, or getting better, whatever it is.
Yeah, and like you said, I love that you said, then that's making a choice. And I started my career with people, we started in the exact same class, and there's people that I know that are still doing the exact same job that we started doing back in 1992, and they are blissfully happy doing it. they don't want to do anymore. And,
It's good for
that's
them.
wonderful.
Right.
But for me, every 3 years, it was almost like clockwork. Okay,
Yeah.
what's next? What's next? What's next? I was
Mhm.
always looking, I'm still looking for like, what's next and how can I get better? And kind
Right.
of like you, that you're a lifelong learner, so am I. And I love learning and I love understanding. And now I'm doing a lot of emotional work because
Mhm.
it's so interesting. I'm not a therapist, but as a career coach, we do get a lot into, well, so like for example, one of my clients said the other day to me, like, my little job. I'm like, okay, hold on,
Stop that. Yep.
pause. Like,
Uh-huh.
why did you say my little job? And she was like, what are you talking about? I was like, you just said my little job. And she's like, I didn't even realize. And then we had a whole
Mhm.
conversation about where that thought was coming from and
Mhm.
how she was feeling about it. And I think that's one thing that I really want to make sure that we talk about here, because everything that is happening in your life is being driven by an emotion. And a lot of times, like these four blockers, like what's really underneath those blockers, really a lot of the times boils down to fear.
Yes.
What is the fear and why you have it? And then a lot of times we'll have a conversation like, how did you feel about that? And what can we do about it? And then we start reframing that. But again, I'm not a therapist, but I have trained like um training in the fact that everything, has every action has some kind of feeling behind it, whether
Right.
it's good or bad. Then if you are being paralyzed by the fear, then you're not going to identifying it as, you know what, oh my gosh, I'm really disqualifying myself.
Yeah.
And that's where the magic happens. It's definitely your intellect, but it's also your emotional, like what
Emotions.
is
Right.
happening in
Mhm.
your heart and your soul when it comes to this.
Yeah. It's you're so right on to that. And again, I also think it's important that we as coaches acknowledge that no, we're not therapists, and if this is something that you need therapy for,
Absolutely.
please, I'm begging you, go do that, and then we can help. The therapist can help you there, but we can help you take that step forward,
Exactly. And there
acknowledge it,
have
and take
been
a
a
step
few
forward.
times that I'm like,
Yeah,
you know what? You need to go to a therapist. I'll still work with you, but
right. But that's
uh,
right. That's two different things, right? And but it's important to know that sometimes those fears do require that deeper thing that we are not qualified to help them fix, but we can still help them move forward as long as they're getting help with those other mental health issues that truly need to be addressed. And that's a different story. I think our mental health
absolutely.
system is
Yeah.
needs some serious help too, but that's over there. We'll talk about
Yeah.
that later. Um, and how does you've got your promotion readiness roadmap. How does that all play into these things, the promotion blockers and building confidence, and the preparation? How does all this kind of wrap up and work together?
Yeah, so the promotion readiness roadmap is a series of topics that we have. So yes, the resume and the LinkedIn and things like that. So the promotion readiness roadmap is very tactical. So it's
Mm,
very um, getting the pieces of the puzzle in place so that when you are presented with an opportunity, you are at the ready and you don't have to be scrambling on updating your resume and figuring out what to say in the interview. So it's the resume, the LinkedIn, crafting your script, creating your story vault. Like, what are the stories that you're going to bring to that
mm,
interview, and then pair it with crafting your script. It's creating your 90-day plan. All of those
mhm.
pieces are part of that promotion readiness roadmap. So it's very tactical. Now, yes, I do. We definitely talk about, how do you feel and all that stuff, but I'm a certified high performance coach, and that's the mindset program where
Right.
we talk all about what do you think about this? It's a series of questions that I ask, and based on what they answer, I kind of know where to take the conversation. And I'm always actively listening for kind of like that example, like my little job, like, okay,
Right.
why did you say that? And that's where we get more into where are you emotionally in that scale, and
Mhm.
how is that showing up? And then like I was talking to one of my clients, and she went through a situation where she got laid off like months and months ago, and we were talking about it, and I had asked her, I was like, well, what's the emotion there? Because I don't ask like, how does that make you feel? Because like, what's
Right.
the emotion
Emotion.
there? And then she's like, I just realized that I felt humiliated. And she had not realized that that emotion was still kind of lingering there. And
Hmm.
what's so interesting is that, Tim, once you identify the emotion and you allow yourself to feel it, then you are able to release it, and then you can let it go and move on
Yeah.
to other things. It's so incredible how things that happen in your life impact you emotionally so terribly that if you don't process that,
Yeah.
then it can get stuck. And that's when disease comes into the body. I
Yes.
mean, it's all
Hmm.
connected,
It's all
Tim.
connected.
It's
It really is.
incredible.
It is.
Yeah.
And I wish people knew that before it's too late. And that is
Yes.
so, so important. Um, without getting into too much, it happened to me. It's happened to a ton of people that I know, and I'm not even talking about people from my generation, right? Because it's very common in people from my age group, my generation, but it's also happening with people in younger generations too, because
Mhm.
for different reasons, holding that stress in, not
Mhm.
actually sharing, not letting it go, all those different things, and it does manifest itself into serious health issues. And it's if people understood that and could uh, get the help or get whatever it is that they need to let that go, it's incredibly freeing. And
Yes.
it's I say it's like a weight lifted off, but it's almost like you can't even describe the weight that is lifted off of you when you can get through those types of things.
I totally agree. And it is something that um I've always, and I do a lot of meditation and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And I'm like, man, I wish that we would, kind of
Mm.
like finances. I wish this would be one thing that we taught all human
It is.
beings. It's like you need to be able to learn to process emotions. And, it
Yeah.
kind of bringing it back to the initial conversation of why women don't advocate for themselves is because sometimes we're just like processing all these emotions, and we're stuck and we don't have anybody to kind of help us process. And yet many men don't process the emotions,
Right.
so they just kind of go forward and they're not stuck because maybe they don't even think about it or have that feeling. So we're still human beings and we still have emotions, but we handle them very
Very
differently.
differently. Very differently. Very differently. Well, Rosie, this has been phenomenal. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Where can people find and connect with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is go to my website, which is nowomanleftbehind.com. And woman is WOMAN. Or they can connect with me on LinkedIn at Rosie Career Coaching or Rosie Zilinskas.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, thank you so much for taking some time with us today. You take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Tim. This was wonderful.
Be sure to visit speakingwithconfidencepodcast.com to get your free ebook, Top 21 Challenges for Public Speakers and How to Overcome Them. You can also register for the Foreman for Public Speaking course. Always remember, your voice has the power to change the world. We'll talk to you next time.